All right, it is time to practice what you learned. So you should have just watched the video for lesson 11 on rounding to the nearest whole number, 10th and 100th. And now we want our whiteboards or some scrap paper or maybe your spiral for math so that we can practice what we just learned. As always, just press pause once you see the problem, work it out, and press play to check your answers. Okay, here we go. First one, and we're rounding all of these to the nearest whole number, is 71 7/10. So press pause, and welcome back. So the nearest whole number means the ones place. This 1 is in the ones place. So my answer is either going to be 71 or it's going to be 72. Halfway between 71 and 72 is 71.5. And 71.7 would be more than halfway, which means this would round to 72. Next, 2 48/100. Welcome back. This 2 is what is in the ones place. That's the nearest whole number. So my answer is either going to be 2 or it's going to be 3. Okay, it's either 2 or 1 up from 2, which is 3. Halfway between 2 and 3 is 2.5. I see my answer here, or the number I'm looking at, my problem, goes to the hundredths. So I'm going to go ahead and add a 0 to my halfway point so it's either easier to compare. This is 48, this is 50. Isn't 48 less than 50? Yes, so that means 2.48 would come before 2.5. So this one would round to 2. Third one, the 1 is in the ones place, and that's the whole number. So it's either going to be 71 or it's going to be 72. Halfway between 71 and 72 is 71.5. This has 2 places, so I want this to have 2 places. And 64 hundredths is more than 50 hundredths, so that means it's going to be closer to 72. Next, 89.9. Okay, this 9 is in the ones place, so my answer is either going to be 89 or the next one up from 89. If I had 1 to 89, it would be 90. Halfway between 89 and 90 is 89.5. And 0.9, 9/10 is more than 5/10, so that means it's going to be closer to 90. Our fifth example, 799 73 hundredths. This 9 is in the ones place, so when I'm rounding to the nearest whole number, again, that's what I'm looking at. So it's either going to be 799, or if I add a 1 to the ones place, 800. Halfway between those two would be 799.5. Here, I have 2 places to the right of the decimal, so here I'd like to have 2 places to the right. And now I can see 73 hundredths is more than 50 hundredths, which means this would be closer to 800. All right, next I want you to round to the nearest tenths place. Round to the nearest tenth. So I first have to figure out what number is in the tenths place. This 3 is. So if I'm rounding to the nearest tenths, this is either going to be 6.3 or I add a tenth, which would make it 6.4. Those are my 2 choices, so I have to figure out which one is this closer to. The halfway point between 6.3 and 6.4 is 6.35. And again, we said we could look at this as 6.30, 6.40. Halfway between 30 and 40 would be 35. So anywho, 36 hundredths is going to be past the halfway mark because this is 35. Next up would be 36. So that means my correct answer here is just 6.4. Don't put that 0 in your answer. I want you to stop at the tenths place when I ask you to round to the tenths. Next, 6 491 thousandths. I want you to round that to the nearest tenth. All of these are rounded to the nearest tenth. This 4 is in the tenths place. So my answer is either going to be 6.4 or 6.5 if I add 1/10 to that 6.4. Halfway would be 6.45 because halfway between 40 and 50 is 45. Now when I look here, I see 3 digits to the right of the decimal point. So when I'm looking at my halfway, I want to add a 0 there, so I have 3 digits here. And now it's easier to see, hey, 491, that's greater than 450, which means my answer is going to be closer to 6.5. So you should have rounded number 2 to 6.5. Right, here's your next one, 0.927. So this 9 is in the tenths place. That's what I want to round to. So it's either going to stay 0.9. And now think about this. If I add 1/10 to 9/10, It means I have 10 tenths. And if you have 10 tenths, doesn't that mean you have 1 whole? Yeah, so I'm gonna write 1.0 on the side over here. I put this 0 because I'm rounding to the nearest tenth and I wanna have a digit in the tenths place. So halfway between these two would be 95 hundredths. Again, because halfway between 90 and 100 is 95. I see 3 places to the right of the decimal point here, so I'm gonna put 3 places here so I can compare more easily. This is 950 thousandths, this is 927 thousandths. Wouldn't that become before 950? Yes, so that means that my 927 thousandths is gonna be closer to 9 tenths. Right, number 4, I want to round to the nearest tenths. That's where this 4 is. So I have 123.4 and 123.5 when I add a tenth to that. And my halfway mark, 123.45. Yes, because halfway between 40 and 50 is 45. Now, look at this. That falls exactly in the middle. And remember, we said if it lands exactly in the middle, we just go and blow it off the hill up to the next one. So I would round 123 and 45 hundredths to 123 and 5 tenths because I'm supposed to round to the nearest tenths place. All right, number 5, here we go. This 7 is in the tenths place. So it's either 33.7 or 33.8. I need the halfway mark to help me out. Halfway between 33.7 and 33.8 would be 33.75, which is exactly what I have there. And again, if it's exactly halfway, we blow it on up over the hill to 33.8. Okay, for the last little part here, I want you to round to the nearest hundredth. Round to the nearest hundredth. We're almost there. Okay, so this 7 right here is in the hundredths place, right? So my answer is either going to be 481 and 77 hundredths, or 481 and I'd add 1 hundredth to that. If I add 1 hundredth to the hundredths place, it would be 481 and 78 hundredths. Halfway between 77 and 78 hundredths would be 481.775. And again, the reason that that's happening is because I can look at this as 770 thousandths and this is 780 thousandths. And halfway between 770 and 780 is 775. So that's where we're getting this middle value. Now it's pretty easy to see, right? This is 772, this is 775. 772 thousandths would come before that, which means I should have 481 and 77 hundredths. Don't put that 0 in your answer. When I ask you to round to the hundredths, stop at the hundredths. Next, press pause, figure it out, press play. This 1 is in the hundredths place. So if I'm rounding this to the nearest hundredth, it's either going to be 534 and 21 hundredths or 534 and 22 hundredths. I'm just increasing the hundredths place by 1, okay? Halfway between these two would be 534, and I'm gonna keep this, but then I put a 5 after, because this is like saying halfway between 210 and 220, which is 215. I look at this, I have 216. I know it's close, but it's still greater than halfway, which would mean this is closer to that. So you should have written 534 and 22 hundredths. Number 3, this 4 is in the hundredths place. So it's either gonna be 98 and 54 hundredths or 98 and 55 hundredths. So let's find our halfway mark. Halfway between these would be 98 and 545 thousandths, because 545 is halfway between 540 and 550. Now this says 544, this says 545. 544 comes before 545, which means this would be closer to that. So you should have written 98 and 54 hundredths. Number 4, this 1 is in the hundredths place. So it's either going to be 91 hundredths, or if I add a hundredth to that, 92 hundredths. Halfway between would be 915 thousandths. And again, that's like 910, 920, 915 is halfway. Notice, that's exactly the same. That means that this is exactly halfway. So, there we go. 92 hundredths is what you should have. All right, our last one. This 9 is in the hundredths place. So it's either going to stay 18 and 89 hundredths, or if I add a hundredth, if I have 89 hundredths and I add one more hundredth, that's like saying 89 cents and you add 1 penny, right? Because 1 cent is 1/100th of a dollar. That would mean I'd have $18.90. I'm gonna keep that 0 there because if I'm gonna round to the nearest hundredth, I want a number in the hundredths place. Halfway between those two, there we go, 895 thousandths, because halfway between 890 and 900 is 895. And 891 thousandths would come before 895. So that means that this is closer to 18 and 89 hundredths. And again, if you struggled with this practice time, go back, try this again. You can do this as many times as you need to. And bring questions with you to class if you have them. Thank you so much for working so hard. I'll see you soon.